In today's gripping story, we dive into a shocking airport incident that left an entire terminal stunned, a career in ruins, and a powerful truth revealed in the most unexpected way. Imagine this. A calm, respectful black woman stands at an international airport counter, ready to board her long-awaited flight, only to have officers surround her, accuse her of carrying a fake passport, and then tear the document to pieces right in front of her astonished eyes. Little did they know that this one reckless act would set off a chain reaction they would never forget, because the moment they discovered who her husband was, everything changed. Welcome back to Swift Tale, the channel where unbelievable true-to-life stories unfold with twists you won't see coming. And if you're visiting for the first time, let me ask you, have you hit that like button yet? Have you shared this video? Have you subscribed so you never miss another shocking tale? If not, this is the perfect moment to join the Swift Tale family. In this video, we'll explore a story that goes far beyond one airport confrontation. It reveals how discrimination, arrogance, and abuse of power can lead to devastating consequences, especially when directed at the wrong person. We'll walk through every moment, from the officers' snap judgments to their horrifying mistake, and the moment they nearly broke down when they discovered the truth about the woman's identity and the extraordinary man waiting on the other end of her phone call. So stay with us from beginning to end, because what starts as an unjust humiliation transforms into a powerful lesson in accountability, dignity, and unexpected justice. This is one story you won't forget. Maya Johnson was not the kind of woman anyone could easily overlook. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from years of dedication to serving others, working as a respected humanitarian who traveled across the world to support communities in crisis. At first glance, she appeared calm and gentle, the kind of person who greeted strangers with a warm smile and approached every challenge with patience and dignity. But beneath that soft exterior was a woman of remarkable strength and discipline, someone who had learned long ago that staying composed in the face of adversity was its own form of power. On this particular morning, Maya was traveling for an important international summit where she would speak about global aid efforts. Her suitcase was neatly packed, her documents perfectly in order, and her mind focused on the work ahead. She had no reason to suspect that her day would turn into a nightmare, nor that the people meant to ensure her safety would be the ones to violate it. As she walked through the airport, unaware of the hostile eyes quietly tracking her every move, she had no idea that her grace, her identity, and her unshakable composure would soon be tested in a way she never expected. The airport buzzed with its usual blend of rushing footsteps, echoing announcements, and travelers weaving through lines with determined focus. Maya moved with ease through the bustling terminal, her steps steady, her travel documents tucked neatly in her hand. She had taken this route countless times before, and today felt no different, at least at first. As she approached the security checkpoint, however, she felt the subtle shift in energy around her. One officer stared at her a moment too long, his eyes narrowing as if searching for a flaw that didn't exist. Another whispered something to his partner while glancing in her direction. Still, Maya didn't let it shake her. She was used to being observed. Airports were full of stern expressions and suspicious glances. But what she didn't yet realize was that these officers weren't simply watching her, they were waiting. Their posture stiffened as she handed over her passport, their demeanor suddenly shifting from routine professionalism to an unnerving intensity. Maya sensed the change immediately, though she kept her composure. The simple act of stepping forward to catch a flight was about to turn into a confrontation spiraling far beyond anything she could have imagined. The moment Maya handed over her passport, the atmosphere turned thick with hostility. The officer holding it flipped through its pages with exaggerated suspicion, his brows knitting together as though searching desperately for something wrong. "This doesn't look right," he muttered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, already determined to paint her as a problem. Maya's stomach tightened, but she maintained her calm. She had nothing to hide. "Is there an issue?" she asked. Her voice steady, hopping logic would prevail, but the officer didn't answer. Instead, he signaled two more guards, who arrived with hardened expressions, forming a semicircle around her as if she posed a threat. Travelers began to slow their pace, drawn to the unfolding tension. The lead officer raised his voice, accusing her of carrying a fraudulent passport, claiming the holograms looked wrong and the document seemed altered. The accusations were baseless, yet delivered with absolute confidence. Maya tried to explain This was her legitimate passport, issued legally, stamped at dozens of borders, but the officers dismissed her words with condescending smirks. Their tone grew harsher, more impatient, as though her calmness irritated them. People nearby exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. But for the officers, the crowd only fueled their performance. In their eyes, Maya wasn't a respected humanitarian or a seasoned traveler. She was a target, someone they believed they could intimidate without consequence. What began as a routine check had now spiraled into the first sparks of a humiliating and dangerous confrontation. What happened next stunned everyone within earshot. As Maya stood there, still trying to reason with the officers, the lead guard suddenly snapped the passport shut with a loud slap, his jaw clenched in irritation. "I've seen enough," he declared, his voice echoing through the terminal. Before Maya or anyone else could process his words, he gripped the passport with both hands and tore it straight down the middle. The ripping sound cut through the air like a scream. Gasps erupted from the surrounding crowd as the two halves of the passport fluttered to the floor, the pages, filled with years of visas, stamps, and personal history, scattered like discarded scraps. Maya felt her chest tighten, not just from shock, but from the deep violation of identity and dignity. She stared at the torn pieces, frozen between disbelief and rising heartbreak. That passport represented years of work, countless missions abroad, and the life she had built with integrity. Destroying it wasn't just unprofessional, it was an act of humiliation. The officer, however, stood tall with misplaced pride, crossing his arms as if he had just exposed a criminal. "Fraudulent documents are destroyed on sight," he barked, never breaking eye contact with her as though daring her to challenge him. Murmurs spread through the terminal, some passengers horrified, others outraged. Yet despite all this, Maya held herself with remarkable grace. She didn't lash out, didn't scream, didn't crumble. Instead, she took a slow breath, her eyes steady as she finally looked up at the officer and said in a calm, almost chilling tone, "You just made a very serious mistake." Her composure unsettled him more than any argument could have. Little did he know just how true her words were. Despite the humiliation, despite the sting of seeing her identity torn in half, Maya did not lose control. In fact, her silence became more powerful than any angry outburst she could have made. She slowly knelt and picked up the torn pieces of her passport, holding them gently as though they were something fragile and sacred. The officers expected outrage, shouting, panic, or tears, but instead she rose with a composure that made them uneasy. Her eyes, calm yet unwavering, told them she wasn't a woman who broke easily. "You don't know what you've just done," she said softly, her voice steady, every word precise. The officers exchanged glances, some scoffing, others shifting uncomfortably, unsure if she was bluffing or simply delusional. Her calmness irritated them. It challenged their sense of control. One officer sneered, "What, you think someone important is going to come save you?" Another added with a smug smirk, "If anything, you should be thanking us for catching you." Maya said nothing more. She didn't need to. She simply pulled out her phone, slowly, confidently, and requested permission to make one call. Her tone, poised and unshaken, suggested she wasn't asking permission at all. Even then, the officers laughed, mocking her as if she were acting above her station. What they didn't understand was that Maya wasn't bluffing, and her quiet strength wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. A storm was coming, and it was one she wouldn't even need to raise her voice to unleash. After mocking her calm request to make a phone call, the officers escalated the situation even further, ordering Maya to follow them to a small detainment room tucked behind the security checkpoint. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing her away from the crowds who had witnessed the confrontation. Inside, the room felt colder, the fluorescent lights buzzing harshly overhead. The officers kept their tone sharp and accusatory, treating her as though she were a dangerous suspect rather than a wronged traveler. They questioned her aggressively, interrupting her every attempt to speak, twisting her words into more fuel for their baseless accusations. Maya sat with her hands folded neatly, her posture straight, her breathing measured, every bit of her self-control on full display. One officer paced back and forth, muttering sarcastic remarks under his breath. Another leaned against the wall with crossed arms, glaring at her as if daring her to break. Their goal was clear. They wanted to intimidate her, to push her into panic or anger so they could justify the mistreatment they had already inflicted. But Maya refused to give them that victory. Her silence, her poise, her dignity, it all unsettled them more than tears ever could. even when they searched her belongings without permission, rifling through her suitcase as though expecting to find contraband. Maya simply observed with a steady gaze that made a few of them shift with discomfort. Their power trip was beginning to lose its grip, even if they didn't realize it yet. What they had also failed to realize was that in detaining her, mistreating her, and destroying her passport, they had just crossed lines that could cost them far more than they ever imagined. And soon they would feel the consequences closing in. After nearly an hour of senseless questioning and disrespect, the officers finally allowed Maya a single phone call, though they made it clear they didn't expect it to matter. They tossed her phone onto the table with a mocking smirk, as if granting her a privilege she didn't deserve. Maya picked it up calmly, her demeanor unchanged, her voice steady as she dialed a familiar number. The room fell strangely quiet as she waited. When the call connected, her posture softened just slightly. "Hey," she said gently, "I need you to come to the airport. They tore up my passport." Her tone was calm, but beneath it was a weight only someone close to her could recognize. The officers looked at one another, stifling laughter. One whispered, "She probably called her boyfriend," while another snickered, "Yeah, he'll show up in a beat-up car and try to yell at us." Their arrogance blinded them. They didn't notice how Maya's expression didn't hold fear, only certainty. On the other end of the line, her husband's voice dropped to a quiet, chilling seriousness. "Stay where you are. I'm coming, right now," he said. The firmness in his tone made the nearest officer raise an eyebrow, suddenly sensing something unusual, though he dismissed it just as quickly. Maya ended the call and placed the phone back on the table with deliberate care. She looked at the officers, her face unreadable. "He'll be here soon," she said softly. Her calmness returned, heavier this time, almost prophetic. The officers laughed again, but the laughter didn't last long. Behind her composed exterior, the wheels of justice had already begun turning, and in a matter of minutes, their world would tilt in a way none of them were prepared for. 20 minutes later, the energy in the airport shifted so abruptly that even the officers felt it. The distant sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the terminal, followed by the sudden appearance of federal security personnel who moved with precise urgency. Travelers stepped aside instinctively, watching as a group of stern-faced agents formed a path straight toward the detainment room. The officers guarding Maya stiffened, their confidence wavering for the first time. They exchanged confused glances. None of this matched the nobody boyfriend they had mockingly imagined. Then the door swung open. A tall man in a sharply pressed uniform stepped inside, his presence commanding the room before he even spoke. His badges, insignias, and the distinct authority in his posture revealed everything. This was no ordinary husband. This was Commander Elijah Brooks, a high-ranking Navy SEAL officer known for leading classified missions and advising international security councils. His eyes locked onto Maya first, softening only for her, before shifting toward the officers with a cold intensity that made their throats tighten. "What happened to my wife?" he demanded, his voice low but deadly calm. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The officers, suddenly stripped of their arrogance, stumbled over their excuses. One of them tried to speak. But Elijah stepped closer, his presence towering over them. "Who tore up her passport?" he asked, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. No one answered. They didn't need to. The pieces of the passport on the table told the story themselves. The airport's senior officials, who had rushed in behind Elijah, immediately began apologizing, their faces pale with panic. The officers watched helplessly as the truth settled in. They had not just mistreated a traveler, they had humiliated the wife of a man with the power, rank, and diplomatic connections to end their careers with a single report. Their earlier confidence evaporated, replaced by a rising sense of dread. For the first time that day, it was they, not Maya, who felt cornered. And the reckoning had only just begun. The room fell silent as Commander Elijah Brooks slowly lifted the torn passport pieces from the table, holding them with a controlled steadiness that was far more terrifying than anger. The officers watched, trembling, as he examined the damage they had caused. Every second of his silence felt like a blade cutting deeper into their sinking confidence. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "You destroyed a federally issued passport belonging to a U.S. humanitarian delegate," he stated, turning his piercing gaze toward the officers. "Do you know the level of violation that is?" His words struck them harder than any shouted accusation could have. One officer's lips began to tremble, another took a step back, his breath shallow. For the first time, the truth of their actions hit them with crushing clarity. This wasn't just misconduct, it was a career-ending disaster. Senior airport officials scrambled to explain that they had no idea who Maya was, their apologies pouring out desperately, but Elijah wasn't listening to them. His attention stayed on the officers who had mistreated her. Their earlier arrogance had vanished entirely, replaced by fear as their knees nearly buckled under the weight of his stare. The lead officer, who had torn the passport, felt his throat tighten as Elijah stepped closer, the uniformed commander towering over him. "You tore apart a diplomatic spouse's passport," Elijah said quietly. "Do you understand what that means? You didn't just violate protocol, you violated international law." A faint whimper escaped the officer's lips. He couldn't even meet Elijah's eyes. Maya watched silently, not out of spite, but out of the deep, undeniable justice unfolding before her. She didn't need to raise her voice or demand revenge. The truth alone was enough to bring the officers to their knees. And as Elijah placed a protective hand on her shoulder, the officials finally realized they were no longer managing a routine incident. They were dealing with a scandal that could erupt globally. The officers, now pale and trembling, understood the one truth they couldn't escape. Their fate had changed the moment they underestimated Maya Johnson. And now, the consequences were coming swiftly and unmistakably. News of the incident spread through the airport long before any official statement could be made. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation began posting videos online, capturing everything from the officers snatching Maya's passport to the moment they ripped it apart. Within minutes, those clips circulated across social media, gaining thousands of views and igniting outrage. People couldn't believe that a woman who carried herself with such dignity had been treated with blatant disrespect and discrimination. And when viewers learned she was the wife of a decorated Navy SEAL commander, the story exploded even further. Comment sections filled with disbelief, anger, and demands for accountability. Headlines rapidly emerged. Woman's passport destroyed at airport, husband's identity stuns authorities, and security officers accused of abusing power in viral footage. Meanwhile, inside the airport, chaos mounted. Public relations officers rushed to assess the growing storm, scrambling to respond before the narrative spiraled beyond their control. Reporters began calling the airport within the hour, requesting statements, interviews, and confirmation of the unfolding scandal. The atmosphere became tense as every official suddenly recognized the magnitude of the officer's mistake. Not only had they violated protocol, they had done so publicly, with undeniable video evidence. The officers themselves could feel the walls closing in, their earlier confidence replaced with a haunting dread as they realized the world was watching. What they had dismissed as a trivial abuse of authority was now a global conversation, and each passing minute tightened the pressure around them. In trying to assert dominance over Maya, they had instead stepped directly into the spotlight, one that would expose every misjudgment they made that day. "You said 12. ChatGPT said." Here is Section 12, written in full paragraph style. Section 12, full paragraph style. Investigation and accountability. As the videos continued to spread and public outrage intensified, the airport's leadership had no choice but to launch a full-scale internal investigation. What began as a routine misconduct review quickly expanded into something far more serious. Internal Affairs arrived at the airport that same afternoon, gathering statements, reviewing security footage, and interviewing every witness they could find. The evidence was overwhelming. Maya had complied fully, her passport had been valid, and the officers had acted without cause, out of prejudice and unchecked authority. The torn passport itself became the most damning piece of physical proof, a symbol of the irreversible violation committed against her. But the investigation didn't stop there. As Internal Affairs dug deeper into the officers' records, a troubling pattern emerged. Complaints from past travelers, most of them ignored or dismissed, began to resurface. Instances of rude behavior, unnecessary confrontations, and discriminatory conduct had been quietly filed away over the years. Now, with this viral incident shining a harsh light on their actions, every previous accusation was reopened and re-examined. What once looked like isolated events now appeared as a long trail of misuse of power. The officers, who had entered their shifts that day with arrogance and absolute confidence, found themselves suspended indefinitely pending disciplinary action. Their badges were taken, their access revoked, and they were escorted out of the building under the same scrutiny they had once freely placed on others. Meanwhile, federal agencies stepped in due to the involvement of a diplomatic spouse, adding another layer of seriousness to the case. Rumors spread that the consequences could involve criminal charges, job termination, or even civil lawsuits. The officers' world, which they had believed they controlled, was collapsing rapidly around them. In a matter of hours, their abuse of authority had transformed into the biggest reckoning of their careers, proving that injustice, once exposed, carries a weight far too heavy for arrogance to hold. News of the incident exploded across social media, dominating timelines, feeds, and headlines within hours. People around the world were outraged, not only because Maya's passport had been destroyed, but because the entire confrontation reflected a deeper, systemic problem that too many Travolcas had faced in silence. Influencers, activists, lawyers, and ordinary citizens joined the conversation, demanding accountability and transparency. Hashtags calling for justice trended globally, gathering millions of views. Clips of Maya standing composed while officers barked orders at her were replayed endlessly, each time fueling more anger and disbelief. Comment sections flooded with support, and many viewers admitted they felt emotional rage seeing her treated with such disrespect, especially knowing she had done nothing wrong. Major news outlets quickly picked up the story, turning a local airport scandal into an international controversy. Panel discussions aired live, young legal experts who analyzed the gravity of tearing a valid passport, especially that of the spouse of a high-ranking diplomat. The incident became a talking point for political commentators, who debated the implications it had on international relations and Travolc's safety. Some countries even issued travel advisories, urging their citizens to be cautious when dealing with certain airport authorities. What had begun as a moment of unchecked ego by a few officers had become a global lesson in the consequences of racial profiling. The public's support for Maya surged, with thousands expressing admiration for how she maintained dignity despite being humiliated. Many viewers said they were inspired by her calm strength, her refusal to escalate the situation, even when provoked, and her courage to stand firm without backing down. Donations, letters, and messages of encouragement poured in, while human rights groups used the case to highlight the urgent need for reforms in airport security procedures. Maya, once just a Travolc trying to catch her flight, had unknowingly become a symbol of resilience and justice. And as the world watched, the pressure on the authorities to act grew heavier by the minute. The airport authority launched an internal investigation almost immediately, driven not by their own initiative, but by the overwhelming public pressure and the involvement of international diplomatic channels. What began as a simple inquiry into a misunderstanding quickly escalated when surveillance footage, audio recordings, and eyewitness accounts were pieced together. Investigators found that the officers not only violated multiple protocols but acted with blatant misconduct, destroying a valid passport, refusing to verify identity through proper channels, and escalating a situation without cause. The evidence was irrefutable. Their actions were not just unprofessional, they were illegal. As details emerged, the officers involved felt their world collapsing around them. They were placed on immediate suspension, stripped of badge access, and questioned for hours at a time. Some tried to justify their behavior by blaming standard procedures, while others attempted to downplay the severity of tearing a citizen's passport. But the recorded footage showed everything clearly: the unnecessary aggression, the dismissive tone, the refusal to listen, and the moment they ripped Maya's passport with careless arrogance. Even their supervisors, reviewing the tapes, looked pale as they realized how deeply the situation had spiraled out of control. The airport administration now faced diplomatic repercussions, media scrutiny, and the public. In the days that followed, the story exploded across global media, turning Maya into a symbol of dignity and resilience. Under mounting pressure, the airport police issued a formal public apology, not just to Maya, but to the diplomatic community and all Travolcas who feared suffering similar mistreatment. Standing before cameras, the police chief acknowledged the officers' misconduct and promised sweeping reforms, including mandatory bias training, stricter documentation procedures, and harsher penalties for abuse of authority. Yet to many watching, the apology felt less like a gesture of accountability and more like an attempt to salvage the department's reputation. Still, Maya accepted it with her usual grace, stating that her goal had never been revenge, but fairness. As Maya and her husband boarded their private flight home, this time escorted with the respect she deserved, there was a sense of closure, but also a powerful message. Status should never determine how someone is treated, and dignity should never be conditional. The officers learned a hard lesson, the world learned a necessary one, and viewers learned that doing the right thing is not optional, it is essential. And as we wrap up this story, I want to thank you, the audience, for staying with us through this emotional journey. If you're visiting Swiftail for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to drop a comment below. What would you have done if you witnessed this moment unfolding?